Hey guys, welcome back to the third part of the IGCSE biology. So today we are going to do chapter 3, which is the movement into and out of cells. So this chapter is of course for the syllabus between 2023 to 2025 and 2026 to 2028. So if there are any questions and any doubts of some certain concepts, you can always type down in the comment section below. All right, and let's begin today. So the content today, we're just going to go through diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. So all these three processes are very important on its own because in the next few chapters that you're going to learn towards the rest of the syllabus, we have a lot of relationship between the diffusion, osmosis, and active transport in our very important life processes in living organisms. So we're going to start off with diffusion, which is chapter 3.1, and the learning outcomes for today is for both core and extended students is to describe the diffusion as this and state that the energy for diffusion is derived from the kinetic energy of random movement of molecules and ions. State that some substances move into and out of cell by diffusion through the cell membrane. Describe the importance of gaseous diffusion and solutes in living organisms, and investigate the factors that influence diffusion limited to the surface area, temperature, concentration gradient, and the distance. So what is diffusion? So you must know the formula for, not the formula, I mean the definition for diffusion, which is the net movement of particles from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, or you can say down a concentration gradient as a result of their random movement. So what does this tell you is that means that when one side has many of the particles, what happens, like for example, if you focus on the green gaseous particles which have a higher concentration in the left hand side. So what happens is that this higher concentration will move down to fill up this the lower concentration. It means that when it has lesser green balls on the right hand side, what happens is that from the left hand side is going to diffuse to the right hand side, or from more molecules to lesser molecules. Okay, so this is known as diffusion. So what happens in diffusion also is that it reaches an equilibrium, meaning that both sides will not have any movement, no more exchange really, no more going to the left, no more going to right, once both sides are having equal amount. So this is diffusion, that it can reach to an equilibrium. Okay, so most of how this diffusion occurs of the gas particles moving from the left hand side to the right hand side is by the kinetic energy of random movement. So this energy, which is the kinetic energy, which helps to allow the random movement, because gases are so random. Gas particles, they do not have a fixed shape, so their movement is very random. And also ions, okay, because they are so small, they can definitely do not have a very fixed position, and therefore they can move around. The diffusion of gases and solutes is important, as without it, molecules that are needed for life, like for example glucose and oxygen for respiration, will not be able to get to places they are required. Or another one example is the gases exchange in our lungs, where between oxygen and carbon dioxide, these are also undergoing diffusion. So without diffusion, we are unable to transport the gases from one side to another side. And how are we going to get the oxygen that we need for our body to respire? And of course, some substances that move out into and out of the cell diffusion through the cell membrane. The cell membrane is the key barrier that controls what goes out and what comes in. And there are certain substances that the membrane allows them to come in, and certain substances that the membrane do not allow them due to probably its size of the molecule itself. So what are the factors that affects diffusion? So first thing, if you want to have a high diffusion, is you need to have a short diffusion distance. So why is that? It's because, for example, in our lungs, right, all of the membranes in, or the lining of the, like the alveolus, which is the ball sac that it has a lot, so that it has more efficient gases exchange, are thin. So this allows the transport of carbon dioxide and the exchange with oxygen to be faster, okay, and to be more efficient also with the blood capillaries. And the second thing is to maintain the concentration gradient. Remember I told you that diffusion will eventually reach to an equilibrium. So therefore, the concentration gradient has to be always high to low, high to low. So one side has to always remain higher, so that there's always a constant diffusion moving down the concentration gradient constantly before it reaches back to equilibrium, which we do not want, because in some cases, like in our kidney, for example, sometimes glucose maybe not reabsorbed. Okay, when they are not reabsorbed, right, what happens that this is what we call as wasteful product. So not to say wasteful product, it's a very it's what is our body needs, so we cannot just let it move out from our body like that as a waste product. It's a very useful product, I should say. And the next one is larger diffusion distance. Is that why? Is that when there's a larger surface area that's allowing more diffusion to occur in important places in the living organism, which we mentioned before, that the alveoli that has a lot of these sacs in our lungs, so that there will be increase of a surface area and more diffusion, therefore more gas exchange occurs. Temperature, why? At higher diffusion, there will be more, you will induce a higher kinetic energy on these molecules, so therefore they can diffuse faster from one side to another. So we're done with diffusion, which is actually quite simple, but now we step into osmosis. So for 3.2 osmosis, the core students will just need to know how to describe what is the role of water, state that water will only diffuse through the partially permeable membrane, state that water moves into and out of the cell also through the cell membrane, investigate the osmosis using materials such as dialysis tubing, describe the effects of plant tissues of immersing them in solutions in different concentration, and state that plants are supported by the pressure of water inside the cell, pressing outwards on the cell wall. For extended students, you need to know the full definition of the osmosis and you need to memorize them, because they will ask you what is osmosis and they'll give you 2 to 3 marks. How to explain the effects of them when you immerse the plant cells into the solution, then you need to use these terms to describe this osmotic process, and explain the importance of the water potential and osmosis in the uptake and loss of water by the organisms. So this one, I would say it's very simple, and it's also quite commonly asked in past paper question. They will always ask you, what is the role of water in living organism? And the always guaranteed answer is that it acts as a solvent. I cannot deny it is that this question, if it comes on your exam, is very free. And you must know that first thing, it acts as a solvent. It helps for digestion, excretion, and transport. These are very important processes that happens in our body. Okay, so all of these are due to the presence of water that's available to us. And then water is able to diffuse through partially permeable membranes by osmosis. So water molecules are considered to be very small, so therefore they're able to penetrate through the partially permeable membrane. So what does partially permeable mean? Partially means half, okay? Half, and permeable is almost like penetrate, okay? Penetrative membrane. So half, it means that it allows some of the substances to enter, but if it's a full partially permeable membrane, means nothing can pass through. So this is, full partially means everything can go through, okay? So if it's an impermeable membrane, it means that nothing can go through, okay? So water will move into and out of the cell by osmosis through the cell membrane. Okay, now osmosis. So osmosis is a bit similar to diffusion, but now osmosis is usually for water only. So it's the net movement of water molecules from a region of higher water potential, from a dilute solution, to a region of low water potential, which is a concentrated solution, through a partially permeable membrane. So what does higher water potential mean? It means there's a lot of the water molecules in the particular beaker. And low water potential is that there's very little water molecule, and when they say more concentrated, it means that it's like salts, ions, which of course it will increase in concentration. Okay, that's what we call as increasing in solute concentration. Okay, this is also known as solute concentration. So there's a difference between solute concentration and also this water potential. Okay, so of course, same thing as diffusion, it moves from a lot of water molecules down to the side which has lesser water molecules. Okay, so we talk about osmosis in plant cell and animal cell. So these three terms is actually you do not really need to know for the syllabus, but I think it's very important that you at least oh, what does this term mean? So first thing, animal cells. Remember that there is no cell wall and they only have cell membrane. So what happens that cell membrane is not so strong. Is that when there's too many water inside the animal cell that do not, of course, they do not have a plant cell wall, right? They can burst easily. So this is what we call as hypertonic. So I always remember that hyper means too much, okay? Or E is also known as exceed, okay? So what happens is that when hypertonic means too much of water and then it exceeds, it moves out. So exceed, it means that water leaves from the cell. So what happens if that there is no water in the cell is that it becomes shrink. The cell will shrink immediately. So this could be a few reasons. Inside, there could be maybe there could be a lower water potential. Okay, or no, I mean like inside there's a higher water potential and outside there's a lower water potential. So what happens is that water will move out from a higher water potential to a low water potential, and this cell will become what we know as flaccid, or you can say as it shrinks. Okay, so it becomes shriveled, or you can say shriveled is another word. All right, isotonic. Iso means same. Both sides means the outside water potential is the same as the inside water potential. So therefore, water comes in, water comes out, it cancels the effect. There will be no effect. So it's isotonic. So there will be nothing will happen to the cell. But for hypotonic, it means that what happens is that water moves into the cell. Okay, so when too much of water moves into the cell, most likely that the outside of the cell has higher water potential and inside there's a lower water potential, water will enter. So it's of course going through by osmosis. But unfortunately, since animal cells do not have a cell wall, this cell will burst. And this is what we know as plasmolysis. So lysis means burst or destruct. Okay, so plasmo means the plasma membrane burst. Okay, something like this. So osmosis in plant cell, I think it's the same thing, but this time plant cell have the cell wall. So there is no bursting in plant cells. So let's see isotonic first. So isotonic, normal cell. When water enters and also water exceeds, this cancels out the effect. So there is nothing happening to the cell. So iso means same on both sides. Hypotonic, it means that outside has a higher water potential, inside has a low water potential. Water enters, and this is what we know as hypotonic. Okay, so this will become turgid. Turgid means firm. All of the ends are, it can withstand the pressure, because when too much of water comes in, right, it puts pressure on the cell wall, because all of the contents in the let's for example say the cytoplasm will push towards, and it pushes the membrane towards the cell wall. So this cell wall, what we know is that it can handle this turgor pressure. It can withstand the turgor pressure. So that comes from the word turgid lah. Okay, turgor pressure. So turgid means it helps firm the plant cell. Hypertonic, we always see E is as exceed. So what happens is that inside have a relatively higher water potential, outside have a low water potential. Therefore, water exceeds. Of course, the plant cell won't shrink like almost like an animal cell, but the cell membrane, or I would say the cytoplasm, will shrink from the cell wall. It will pull away. It will pull away from the cell wall itself. Okay, then this is also not, we call it as flaccid. So I hope you understand. Of course, if you do not understand, please comment in the section below. I will definitely help you, okay? Okay, now let's come to dialysis tubing. So dialysis tubing is known as a bag, okay, that is helped to act as a partially permeable membrane, and of course is to see whether osmosis, how does osmosis occur. So it's also one of the experiments that to show osmosis can happen. So what happens that these dialysis tubing, right, they have pores, they have small holes that allows contents to move in and move out. It almost acts like a semi-permeable membrane. Semi-permeable membrane and partially permeable membrane is the same thing. So semi means half, partially also means half. So what happens that, for example, if this this whisking tube have a very high solute concentration, meaning like inside there might be a lot of the sugar, a lot of the salt, for example. So what happens that outside is full of water. So this, we assume that the whisking tubing inside has a lower water potential and the water outside has a higher water potential. So what is the effect? The effect is that water will enter and the volume of the dialysis tubing will expand, something like this. Then, of course, if outside there is a lot of the sugar or could be a salt solution. So what happens that outside has a lower water potential, therefore inside has a higher water potential, water will leave, okay? And of course, this volume or the size of the whisking tube will begin to shrink, something like this. So this is what we know as the dialysis tubing. So I didn't follow what happens up here. I just show one example, okay, of how what happens inside B, what happens inside the tubing when they have a high amount of this, what's the effect of osmosis, something like this, okay? This may come out in paper 2. Usually paper 2 will be a very good type of question that can ask for dialysis tubing. For paper 4, not so much, okay? I usually see this in paper 2. Okay, now let's enter to the last part, which is active transport. Active transport, so for the outcomes for this is core students will need to know what is the definition for the active transport. And extended students will also need to know the active transport definition. You need to memorize this actually. And of course, explain the importance of active transport as the process of movement of molecules or ions across membrane, including ion uptake. So ion uptake is the big keyword for active transport. And state that protein carriers move molecules or ions across the membrane during active transports. Okay, let's see. So active transport goes against of diffusion and osmosis. So what do you mean by against? You see, the movement of particles through a cell membrane from a region of lower concentration to higher concentration against a concentration gradient using energy from respiration. So what this tells you is that when outside has a lower of course, lower amount, they have a lower concentration gradient, and inside the cell have a higher concentration gradient, active transport can occur. So from the side of having lower concentration gradient, you move to the higher concentration gradient region. Okay? So, but there's one thing that needs to happen. It needs energy from respiration. Without energy, they cannot transport this from a lower concentration gradient to higher concentration gradient because it is not possible naturally. That's why diffusion occurs. Diffusion and osmosis do not require energy because it can automatically flow by the concentration gradient. If the concentration gradient one side is higher, they will automatically move down to the side which has lower amounts. But for active transport, in order to work inversely, it needs energy. It needs to pay some energy. Then it can only allow this process to occur. Okay. So the importance of active transport as a process for movement of molecules or ions across membrane, including ion uptake by root hair. So what this tells you is that this is a root hair cell. So we may think that inside the root hair cell, there is already a high amount of that ions they need. But outside, with the soil, which has a lot of minerals, they can still enter, but they have to enter through active transport, which is very useful so they can gain a sufficient amount to the root hair cell. So they need to undergo active transport to send these ions across the partially permeable membrane. So protein carriers, okay, so we assume that on the lines here, there's always some proteins here. So proteins, right, they act as a shuttle. This protein, right, because it activates with energy, they help to, so these ions will bind to the protein, okay, and then it will shuttle them to the root hair cell. So it's almost like a converter like that. It helps to transport from one side to another. But of course, it needs energy from the respiration, and active transport will need to occur like this. So from a lower concentration gradient to a higher concentration gradient, or you can say against the concentration gradient. Okay, so protein carriers are present to move molecules or ions across the membrane during active transport. Okay, so that's it for this chapter. Thank you so much for listening. If there are any questions, again, feel free to answer in the comment section below. Thank you so much. Bye bye.